In this installation video, we're going to remove the factory sights and install a set of aftermarket sights on a Canik TP9 SF. We've already field stripped the handgun. We have the slide clamped in a padded protected jaw vise. We're going to begin with the front sight. Start by removing it using a non-marring punch. And take the new front sight and give it a test fit. As you can see, at the moment, it does not want to slide into the dovetail. It'll just barely start. We'll take a file, set it on a good flat surface. We're going to begin by working on the bottom of the sight. So set the sight on the file, give it a drag back towards you, rotate 180 degrees, and repeat. As we've said before, we want to rotate between the passes. It helps us maintain a nice flat surface on the bottom. We're going to go slow, make a couple of passes, and give it a test fit. Okay. In this case, I'm going to run into an issue if I continue to file on the bottom, where this edge, or this surface, and this surface would contact the top of the slide. So at this point, I need to find a dovetail file and begin working on one angled surface. When we use a dovetail file to remove material from one of the angled surfaces on the male dovetail, we want to remove it from one surface. We want to maintain a square factory edge on at least one of those faces. So, find the appropriate dovetail file, make a pass. My personal preference when I'm using a dovetail file and working on the male dovetail of the sight is to work on the front or the downrange side. Personal preference. You can pick whichever one works for you. There again, make a couple of passes and give it a test fit. I'm still not happy, so I'm going to remove a little more material. Alright, we have continued to file down on the sight. We got it going, sights, about half the sight started into the dovetail under finger pressure. At this point, we're going to use a hammer and a non-marring punch. Alright, I know it's going to go all the way in at this point. I'm not having a whole lot of resistance in that I need a metallic punch or a bigger hammer. We're going to go ahead, kick it back out of the dovetail. Okay, we'll scrap that. Okay, going in on the test fit, we can see the sight's going about halfway in under finger pressure. Go ahead, add a little bit of persuasion to get it back out. At this point, we'll take a Q-tip, get a little bit of degreaser on it. Clean out the female dovetail cut in the slide. And we'll go ahead, get a little more. Clean the sight. And get it into place. Alright, we're going to use a hammer and a non-marring punch to drift it into the center of the slide. Go ahead and apply the thread locking compound. Give that a couple of minutes to let it creep in like we want. We'll clean up the excess. If you happen to have a little bit of that red Loctite pile up and get on the white dot, it's okay. As long as you don't let it sit for more than a couple of minutes, it'll wipe right off. Camera's on the other side, you can't really see it, but I got just a little bit there. Go ahead, wipe it off right now. And we've probably had enough time for that to creep in like we want. Let's just go ahead and get it all cleaned up. Alright, front side is done. We'll move on to the rear. This rear side's got a pair of set screws, so obviously the first thing we need to do is come in with a hex key and get them backed off. We've said this in other videos. If you come across a hex key that you think, a set screw that you think has a Loctite, and you can't get it to back off with just your normal hex key, get a soldering iron, let it get warm. Hold it to the screw head for a couple of 3 minutes. That heat should be enough to soften up the Loctite to where you can get it all broken free. Okay, we had one of these set screws that was being a little troublesome. So, got the soldering iron out. We're going to go ahead. You notice we've got a point that's curved and it allows for very precision application of heat. We're going to go ahead and just go into the bottom of that screw. And we're going to give it a minute or two, let it warm everything up. That should loosen up, soften up that Loctite that they used at the factory so that we can get that screw to break free. Give it a little more heat. In this particular case, that one set screw is just not going to move on me. I don't think I stripped it out, but I'm not going to swear to that. So we're going to make sure that the one that does move is definitely free and clear, and we're going to drive that rear sight out. We're going to drive it out towards the frozen screw. That way, if it is going to cause some damage, we can try and minimize that. In theory, it shouldn't do any harm except to maybe the Cerakote in the very bottom of that cut, because the screw should be softer than the slide. Alright. Alright, as you can see, because that set screw was frozen and we couldn't get it to move, and it's basically stripped out, there's two options, drive it out or cut it out. Cutting it out is not something we want to do. There's very, very high probability of damage in the slide. So we drove it out, and as you can see, that set screw was indeed softer than the slide, but it did drag through the Cerakote on the top of the slide. Not super happy about that. However, once we clean everything, get the new rear sight in, and apply the red thread locking compound, you're not going to see it. It's not going to be visible, and because the sight's there with the red thread locker, it will be protected from corrosion. All right, go ahead, get this guy clamped back in the slide, in the vise. Take the new rear sight and give it a dry fit. As you can see, it slips in. There's no need to remove any material. Go ahead and get a Q-tip. We'll go in, make sure there's no dirt, debris, or oil in the bottom of that dovetail. We're going to do the same thing on the rear sight to verify that it is clean. Gives the red thread locker a good surface to adhere to. Alright, slide the rear sight into the dovetail. Visually center it up. In this case, the sight's just the perfect width for the slide, so it's very easy to get centered. Using the supplied hex key, we're just going to snug those set screws. You'll feel it contact the top of the slide. When you do, don't go more than about 1/8 of a turn. We're not relying on those set screws to do all of the holding. We're also going to use the red thread locker to ensure a good solid hold. Right. Got that applied. We'll let it sit for a couple of minutes and wipe off the excess. Okay, that's had a couple of minutes for the thread locker to creep in. We're just going to take a Q-tip and wipe off the excessive thread locker. There we go. Installation is done. It's ready to put back together, take it to the range, see how it shoots.